Mother Bear refused to help the dying bear cub. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. A gentle breeze whispered through the tall pines as golden sunlight filtered through the forest canopy. At the edge of a small clearing stood the Mason family's rustic cottage, its weathered wooden walls blending harmoniously with the surrounding wilderness. The cottage had been Lily Morgan's childhood home, and now she was raising her own daughter, Emma, in this peaceful sanctuary where the boundary between civilization and nature blurred. Inside the cozy dwelling, 11-month-old Emma played quietly on a handmade quilt spread across the living room floor. She had only recently mastered the art of walking, her tiny legs still wobbly and uncertain as she toddled about. Lily watched her daughter with adoring eyes while preparing lunch in the adjacent kitchen, grateful for the peaceful afternoon. The tranquility was suddenly broken by a faint, distressing sound, a weak whimpering that drifted through the partially open window. Lily paused her chopping, knife suspended midair as she strained to listen. The pitiful cry came again, unmistakably the sound of an animal in pain. Moving to the window, Lily peered out toward the forest's edge and gasped. A small brown bear cub lay collapsed on the ground, its body trembling with each labored breath. More shocking was the sight of a full-grown female bear, presumably the cub's mother, standing rigidly at the forest's edge, making no move to approach her suffering young. "What on earth?" Lily murmured, bewildered by the mother bear's behavior. Even from a distance, she could see that something was terribly wrong with the cub. Its fur appeared matted, its movements uncoordinated and weak as it tried and failed to rise from the ground. The mother bear paced back and forth at the tree line, occasionally rising on her hind legs to sniff the air. Her behavior was utterly perplexing. She seemed aware of her cub's distress but refused to approach, almost as if she was afraid or somehow repelled by her own offspring. Lily's neighbor, Jacob Bennett, emerged from his cabin nearby, drawn by the unusual commotion. He joined Lily at the edge of her porch, binoculars in hand. "I've never seen anything like it," Jacob muttered, adjusting the focus. "That mother's abandoned her cub. Something must be really wrong." "Should we call the wildlife service?" Lily asked, her voice tight with concern. The cub's cries were growing weaker, more desperate. "Already did," Jacob replied grimly. "They're at least 40 minutes out. I don't think that little one has that long." Inside the cottage, Emma had grown unusually still. The baby's head tilted as she listened to the strange sounds coming from outside. Her cherubic face showed an expression of curiosity that seemed far beyond her young age. As the adults conferred anxiously on the porch, Emma pulled herself up against the furniture and wobbled toward the door that had been left slightly ajar. No one noticed the tiny figure slip outside, determined little legs carrying her forward one unsteady step at a time toward the sound of suffering that somehow called to her innocent heart. The adults remained focused on the distressing scene before them, unaware of Emma's escape. The little girl's face scrunched in concentration as she made her way across the uneven ground, her chubby hands occasionally reaching out to steady herself against the tall grass. Something in the cub's cries resonated deep within her, awakening an instinct far older than her 11 months of life. "I'll try to keep the mother at bay if she approaches," Jacob said, reaching for the bear spray he always kept on his belt when venturing outdoors. Bears don't usually come this close to the cabins, especially not in broad daylight. "Something's very wrong here." Lily nodded, her maternal instincts flaring with concern, both for the suffering cub and for the danger the situation presented. It was then that the horrifying realization struck her. Emma was no longer inside the house. "Emma!" she called, spinning around. Her heart froze when she spotted her baby, now halfway across the yard, determinedly wobbling toward the injured bear cub. "Emma!" No exclamation mark. Her scream pierced the air, causing the mother bear to rear up on her hind legs, agitated by the sudden noise. Jacob grabbed Lily's arm as she lunged forward, holding her back. "Don't run," he warned urgently. "You'll trigger the mother's defensive instincts. Move slowly." But the mother bear did something unexpected. Instead of charging toward the approaching human child to protect her cub, she backed away further into the trees, still watching, still refusing to help her offspring. Her behavior defied everything they knew about protective mother bears. "What is wrong with her?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling as she began to inch forward, desperate to reach her daughter before disaster struck. "Why won't she help her baby?" Emma had almost reached the cub now, the small bear's eyes glazed with pain, fixed on the approaching human child. It made a pitiful sound, softer than before, as if hope had briefly flickered within its fading consciousness. "Emma, sweetie, stop!" Lily called in the calmest voice she could muster, though her heart hammered violently against her ribs. "Come back to Mommy, please, baby." But Emma seemed entranced, driven by a purpose beyond her years. She plopped down beside the suffering cub, her diaper crinkling as she settled on the ground. Before either adult could reach her, she had placed her tiny hand on the cub's heaving side. Time seemed to freeze. The forest fell silent. Even the birds ceased their singing as this impossible moment unfolded. A human baby touching a wild bear cub, while its mother watched from a distance. "Dear God," Jacob breathed, bear spray still in hand, body tense and ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. The cub's breathing was dangerously shallow now. Up close, they could see what had been invisible from a distance, strange, weeping sores covering portions of the cub's body. Its fur was falling out in patches, explaining the mother's reluctance. The cub was seriously ill, possibly contagious. "It's sick," Jacob whispered. "The mother knows she's protecting herself, perhaps her other cubs." Nature's cruel logic suddenly became clear. The mother bear was ensuring her own survival by abandoning her dying offspring. It was brutal but instinctive, the harsh reality of wild existence. Emma, unaware of disease or danger, gently patted the cub's head. To everyone's astonishment, the little creature responded, turning its muzzle toward the child's touch. Its labored breathing seemed to ease slightly, finding comfort in this unexpected tenderness. From the tree line came a low, mournful sound. The mother bear was watching intently, swaying her massive head from side to side as if caught in an internal struggle between instinct and emotion. "This is incredible," Jacob said softly, not daring to move closer. "I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of living in these woods." Lily inched forward, her maternal fear now mingled with awe at her daughter's fearless compassion. Emma began humming, a simple, tuneless sound that she often made when content. Her small fingers gently stroked the cub's ear, and miraculously, the dying animal seemed to relax under her touch. The radio on Jacob's belt crackled to life, startling them all. "Wildlife response. ETA 15 minutes. What's your status?" The sudden noise caused a dramatic shift in the scene. The mother bear grunted loudly, taking several steps forward before stopping again, torn between approaching and retreating. The cub tried to lift its head toward its mother, a last plea for help that sent tears streaming down Lily's face. Then something extraordinary happened. Emma looked up at the mother bear and extended her other hand, palm out, in a gesture that seemed impossibly knowing for a child so young. She continued humming, her body positioned between the cub and any potential threat, a tiny guardian offering protection and comfort. "She's bridging them," whispered Lily in disbelief. "Somehow my baby is connecting them." The mother bear hesitated, then slowly, cautiously began to approach. Jacob raised his bear spray, but Lily gently pushed his arm down. "Wait," she said, her intuition guiding her. "Just wait." The large bear moved with deliberate care, each step heavy with reluctance, yet pulled forward by some force stronger than fear. When she was about 10 feet away, she stopped and made a soft chuffing sound. Emma, as if understanding, smiled and continued her gentle petting of the cub. Then another figure emerged from the woods, a second healthy cub cautiously following its mother. The puzzle pieces suddenly clicked into place. The mother hadn't abandoned her sick cub out of cruel indifference. She had been protecting her healthy offspring from whatever illness plagued its sibling. The sick cub made one more attempt to rise at the sight of its family, managing to lift its head momentarily before collapsing back to the ground. Its breathing grew more labored, each inhale a visible struggle that wrung Lily's heart. "It's dying," Jacob said softly. "Nothing can save it now." But Emma, in her innocent wisdom, seemed to understand what was needed in this moment. She scooted closer, cradling the cub's head in her lap as gently as if it were one of her stuffed toys. Her humming never stopped, a simple lullaby for a passing life. The mother bear watched, her massive body trembling with what appeared remarkably like grief. She made no move to interfere, as if recognizing that this small human was giving her cub something she could not. Comfort in it. Tears flowed freely down Lily's cheeks now. Her fear transformed into profound emotion as she watched her baby demonstrate a depth of compassion that many adults never achieve. The healthy cub sat beside its mother, silent witness to this strange and beautiful moment where the boundaries between species dissolved in the face of suffering and kindness. "The wildlife team will be here soon," Jacob said quietly, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I think Emma is giving this cub exactly what it needs right now." Lily nodded, unable to speak. She knew they should remove Emma from this potentially dangerous situation, yet something told her that interrupting this sacred moment would be wrong. Her daughter was exactly where she needed to be, fulfilling a purpose beyond rational explanation. The sun shifted position, casting dappled light through the trees onto the unusual gathering. Time seemed to slow as they all bore witness to the cub's labored breathing. Each rise and fall of its small chest grew more shallow, the pauses between breaths lengthening ominously. Emma's tiny hand continued its gentle stroking, her innocent face showing a peculiar understanding far beyond her years. Suddenly, a new sound broke the reverent silence, the rumble of an approaching vehicle. The wildlife response team had arrived earlier than expected. The noise startled the mother bear, who huffed loudly and took several protective steps toward her healthy cub. "They're here," Jacob said, turning toward the dirt road, where dust billowed behind a green truck emblazoned with the Forest Service logo. "I'll go meet them, explain the situation." As Jacob hurried toward the approaching vehicle, Lily remained frozen, torn between maternal instinct to protect her child and a profound sense that Emma was safe, even in this extraordinary circumstance. The mother bear, despite her obvious agitation at the new disturbance, made no threatening moves toward the human baby. From the truck emerged 2 uniformed wildlife officers and a woman in civilian clothes who carried a medical bag, clearly the veterinarian. Their faces registered shock as they took in the scene before them. "Ma'am, please don't move," called one of the officers, his hand instinctively moving to the tranquilizer gun at his side. We need you to stay completely still while we assess the situation." Jacob intercepted them, speaking in urgent, hushed tones, gesturing toward Emma and the bears. The veterinarian's expression changed from alarm to fascination as she listened. "I've never heard of anything like this," she said, loud enough for Lily to hear. "A mother bear allowing a human child near her cubs? It defies everything we know about bear behavior." The sick cub's breathing had become alarmingly irregular now. Its eyes, once bright with pain, were growing dim. Emma, sensing the change, leaned down and pressed her forehead gently against the cub's head, an act of such tender intimacy that Lily had to stifle a sob. The forest fell silent again, as if nature itself held its breath. Even the birds ceased their calls, creating an eerie stillness broken only by Emma's soft humming. Then, without warning, the mother bear made her move. With deliberate, heavy steps, she approached her dying cub and the human child who comforted it. Jacob and the wildlife officers tensed, weapons at the ready, but Lily raised her hand. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." The massive bear stopped just feet away from Emma and her cub. She lowered her head, nostrils flaring as she sniffed her suffering offspring. A low, mournful sound emerged from deep in her chest, a sound of such profound grief that tears sprang to the eyes of every adult present. Emma, unafraid, looked up at the enormous creature towering over her. What happened next would be recounted in the valley for years to come, achieving almost mythical status among those who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. The little girl reached out her free hand toward the mother bear, palm up, offering comfort not just to the cub but to its grieving parent. For one heart-stopping moment, the bear's massive muzzle hovered inches from Emma's tiny fingers. "Dear God," breathed the veterinarian, frozen in place like everyone else. The mother bear gently, incredibly gently, touched her nose to Emma's palm. It was the briefest of contacts, but in that moment something profound passed between them. An understanding, a connection that transcended the natural boundaries separating their species. Then, with utmost delicacy, the mother bear nuzzled her dying cub. She made soft chuffing sounds, communicating in ways only her kind could understand, saying goodbye in the language of bears. The cub responded with one final, weak movement, turning its head toward its mother's touch even as its breathing grew more labored. Emma continued humming, her small body now creating a bridge between mother and child in these precious final moments. "She's helping them say goodbye," the veterinarian whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. "That baby somehow knows exactly what they need." The healthy cub watched from a distance, confused but patient, as if sensing the solemnity of the moment. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, bringing with it the sweet scent of wildflowers from the nearby meadow. And then, with one final soft exhale, the sick cub grew still. Its suffering had ended, but not in lonely abandonment as nature might have dictated. Instead, surrounded by compassion from the most unexpected source. Emma stopped humming. She blinked down at the now motionless cub, her face showing a flicker of understanding beyond her years. She patted the cub's head one more time, then looked up at the mother bear and did something that caused audible gasps from everyone watching. She extended her arms in the universal gesture that meant up. It was the motion she made when she wanted her own mother to lift her, to hold her close in comfort. Somehow, this human baby understood that the massive creature before her was a mother in pain, a mother who needed consolation. The mother bear didn't respond to the gesture. Such interspecies communication had its limits, but she didn't retreat either. She stood watching Emma for several long moments while the humans held their breath. Then, with a deep huffing sound, she gently nudged her dead cub with her nose one last time before backing away. She turned toward her living cub, who bounded to her side. With one last look at the strange human child who had comforted her dying offspring, the mother bear led her remaining cub back toward the forest depths. Only when they had disappeared among the trees did anyone dare to move. The wildlife officers exchanged glances of disbelief, and the veterinarian approached slowly, medical bag in hand, though she knew her services were no longer needed. Lily rushed forward, finally giving in to her maternal instinct to reclaim her child from this dangerous situation, though the danger seemed to have passed with the bear's departure. She gathered Emma into her arms, holding her tightly, tears flowing freely. "Oh, Emma," she whispered, burying her face in her daughter's soft hair. "What did you do, my brave, impossible girl? What did you do?" Emma looked back at her mother with clear eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond her months on this earth. She pointed to where the cub lay and made a soft sound, then rested her head on Lily's shoulder, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of what had transpired. The veterinarian knelt beside the dead cub, examining it with professional detachment that couldn't quite mask her emotional response to what she had witnessed. "Advanced stage of mange," she said after a moment. "Severely infected. That's why the mother kept her distance. Bears instinctively avoid contagious diseases to protect themselves and their healthy offspring." She looked up at Lily, her eyes still moist. "Your daughter gave this cub the comfort its own mother couldn't risk giving. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of wildlife medicine." Jacob approached, placing a supportive hand on Lily's shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I think so," Lily replied, still clutching Emma tightly. "I just don't understand. How did she know? Why wasn't she afraid?" The older of the two wildlife officers, a man with weathered skin and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Miss, I've worked with bears for over 30 years, and I've seen things in these mountains that can't be explained by science. The old-timers around here, especially the native folks from the reservation, they say children sometimes have a connection to animals that we lose as we grow up, something pure that gets covered over by all our adult fears and knowledge." He looked at Emma with something approaching reverence. "Your little one has a gift. What we just saw—" He shook his head, words failing him. The veterinarian began preparing to remove the cub's body for examination. "We'll need to take it to the lab, confirm the diagnosis, make sure there's no risk of epidemic in the local bear population." Lily nodded absently, still trying to process everything that had happened. Emma had fallen asleep in her arms, utterly spent by the emotional intensity of the experience. The child's face was peaceful, showing no signs of trauma or fear from her extraordinary encounter. "Will you tell us what you find out?" Jacob asked the veterinarian. "About what was wrong with the cub?" "Of course," she replied, carefully placing the small body in a special container. "Though I doubt the lab tests will explain what we just witnessed here today." She glanced at the sleeping child in Lily's arms. "Some things can't be measured or quantified." As the wildlife team prepared to depart, neighbors began appearing at the edges of the clearing, drawn by the commotion and official vehicles. Word would spread quickly through their small community about the miracle they had missed, the impossible connection between a human baby and a wild bear family, the compassion that had transcended species barriers. Lily carried Emma back toward their cottage, her mind swimming with the implications of what her daughter had done. Was it merely the innocent fearlessness of a child too young to understand danger? Or was it something more? A pure empathy, unfiltered by the prejudices and fears adults accumulated through life? Jacob walked beside them, protective and still visibly moved by what they had witnessed. "You know," he said softly. My grandmother used to tell stories about children with special gifts, kids who could communicate with animals, who could sense things others couldn't. He glanced at the sleeping Emma. I always thought they were just tales to entertain us on long winter nights. Lily kissed the top of her daughter's head. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. But I do know my Emma did something beautiful today, something I'll never forget. As they reached the porch steps, a soft rain began to fall, cleansing the forest air. The distant rumble of thunder seemed to mark the passing of the extraordinary moment they had shared, nature's own acknowledgment of the rare communion between species they had witnessed. Inside the cottage, Lily gently laid Emma in her crib. The child stirred briefly, her eyes opening for just a moment. She made the same humming sound she had used to comfort the dying cub, then drifted back to sleep with the innocent peace that only children possess. Lily stood watching her daughter, wondering what memories, if any, Emma would retain of this day. Would she remember the connection she had forged with wild creatures? Or would it fade like so many early childhood experiences, leaving behind only a mysterious affinity for animals that she could never quite explain? Outside, the mother bear and her remaining cub made their way deep into the forest. If bears could know grief or gratitude, perhaps she carried both as she led her surviving offspring toward their den. Perhaps something had shifted in her understanding of the human world that had always seemed so threatening. Or perhaps she simply followed her instincts, focused now solely on protecting the cub that still needed her care. The rain continued to fall, washing away the traces of the encounter. The small indentation in the grass where the cub had lain, the tiny footprints Emma had left as she toddled toward her destiny as an unlikely comforter of wild things. By morning, no physical evidence would remain of the miracle that had occurred in this ordinary clearing on what had begun as an ordinary day. But something had changed, something intangible but profound. Those who had witnessed Emma's act of compassion would never see the boundary between humans and animals quite the same way again. A veil had been lifted, if only briefly, revealing the possibility of connection across seemingly insurmountable differences. The days that followed brought rain and fog to the mountain valley, as if nature itself was in mourning. Lily found herself watching Emma with new eyes, searching for signs that might explain her daughter's extraordinary behavior. The child seemed unchanged, still the same sweet, curious baby who delighted in simple pleasures and babbled happily to her stuffed animals. Yet Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just in how she saw her daughter, but in how she understood the world. On the third morning after the incident, a soft knock came at the cottage door. Lily opened it to find Sarah Blackhawk, an elder from the Native American reservation that bordered the national forest. Though they had exchanged pleasantries at the local farmers' market, they weren't well acquainted. The older woman's unexpected visit was surprising. "May I come in?" Sarah asked, her weathered face solemn. Behind her, mist clung to the trees, shrouding the forest in mystery. "Of course," Lily replied, stepping aside. "Can I offer you some tea?" Sarah nodded, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. Her dark eyes moved immediately to Emma, who was playing on her quilt nearby. The child looked up, seeming to sense the visitor's attention, and gave a toothless smile that illuminated her entire face. "Word travels fast in small communities," Sarah said, accepting the steaming mug Lily offered, "especially when it's about something as extraordinary as what happened here." Lily sat down across from her, cradling her own tea. "I'm still trying to make sense of it myself." Sarah studied Emma thoughtfully. "My grandmother was what our people call a medicine woman. She believed that some children are born with special gifts, abilities to bridge the gap between humans and the natural world. She took a careful sip of her tea. These gifts often fade as children grow older, buried beneath the weight of societal expectations and rational thinking. You think Emma has this gift? Lily asked, trying to keep the skepticism from her voice. She had been raised in a pragmatic household where such mystical notions were dismissed as superstition. I think what happened with the bears cannot be explained by conventional understanding, Sarah replied simply. She reached into the leather bag she carried and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. I brought something for her, a protection amulet my grandmother made. It's very old. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small pendant, a polished stone of deep blue set in intricate beadwork. Lapis lazuli. In our tradition, it strengthens the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds while offering protection to those who walk between them. Lily hesitated, torn between not wanting to offend her visitor and her instinctive wariness of attributing supernatural qualities to her daughter. Before she could respond, Emma toddled over, drawn by the glint of the stone. The baby reached out a chubby hand, her eyes fixed on the pendant with unmistakable interest. She's drawn to it, Sarah observed quietly. The stone recognizes her spirit. As if to confirm this, Emma made a sound remarkably similar to the humming she had used to comfort the dying bear cub. The resemblance sent a chill down Lily's spine. There's something else you should know, Sarah said, gently placing the pendant in Emma's outstretched hand. The rangers found tracks yesterday, about a mile from here. The mother bear has been circling back, coming closer to your property each night. Lily tensed immediately. Is that a threat? Should we be worried? Sarah shook her head slowly. I don't believe so. Bears have long memories. This one shared something profound with your daughter. I think she's drawn back by that connection, not by any aggressive intent. But a wild bear near our home is certainly something to be respectful of, Sarah completed. I'm not suggesting you leave food out or encourage her visits. Wild animals must remain wild, but I also don't think you need to fear her. Emma had settled on the floor again, the pendant clutched in her tiny fist, seemingly fascinated by how the light played across its surface. There's a story among my people, Sarah continued, watching the child, about a time when animals and humans could speak the same language, when the boundaries between their worlds were less fixed. It's said that occasionally a child is born who remembers this ancient tongue. She smiled gently at Lily's skeptical expression. Whether you see it as literal truth or metaphorical wisdom is your choice. But something extraordinary happened here, something that cannot be fully explained by science alone. Later that afternoon, after Sarah had departed and Emma was down for her nap, Lily found herself drawn to the window that faced the forest. The mist had cleared somewhat, revealing the edge of the trees where the mother bear had stood, watching her dying cub. Had it really only been 3 days ago? It felt like a lifetime. The ringing of her phone startled her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Caroline Chen, the wildlife veterinarian who had taken the cub's body. Mrs. Morgan, I thought you'd want to know the results of our examination, the veterinarian said, her voice carrying an odd note that Lily couldn't quite identify. Yes, thank you. Did you confirm it was mange? That's just it, Doctor, Chen replied. It wasn't mange. The cub was suffering from a rare genetic disorder that affects the skin and nervous system. There's no official name for it because it's so rarely documented in wild bear populations. The symptoms can look like mange, but it's not contagious at all. Lily sank into a chair, processing this information. So, the mother bear wasn't staying away to protect herself or her other cub from infection. No, Dr. Chen confirmed. From a purely medical perspective, there was no reason for her to abandon her cub. That's what's so puzzling. Then why would she refuse to help it? Lily asked, thinking aloud. There was a pause on the line. Bears are pragmatic creatures, Dr. Chen finally said. In the wild, resources are limited. A mother with 2 cubs, one healthy and one severely compromised. Nature can be cruel in its efficiency. The implication was clear. The mother bear had made a brutal but evolutionarily sound choice to invest her energy in the cub that could survive. It was natural selection at its most raw. There's something else, the veterinarian continued. We found unusual brain activity patterns when we did the neural tissue examination. Almost as if the cub was experiencing a state similar to what humans might call comfort or peace in its final moments. I've never seen anything like it in a wild animal that died under stress. After ending the call, Lily sat in silence, attempting to reconcile these new revelations with what she had witnessed. The scientific explanation suggested that Emma had somehow calmed the cub's neural activity in its final moments, providing a kind of peace that even its own mother couldn't offer. Yet this clinical interpretation failed to capture the profound emotional exchange she had witnessed. The way the mother bear had touched her nose to Emma's palm, the mournful sounds she had made as she said goodbye to her dying offspring. The pendant Sarah had given Emma lay on the kitchen counter, its deep blue stone seeming to hold secrets within its depths. Lily picked it up, feeling its cool weight against her palm. Was it possible that there were forms of connection that transcended scientific understanding? That her daughter possessed a gift that allowed her to bridge worlds that most adults couldn't even perceive? A sharp knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jacob, his expression tense. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "Can you get Emma? And bring a jacket. It's getting cold out there." "What's going on?" Lily asked, immediately concerned by his urgency. "Just trust me," he replied. "It's not dangerous, but well, you need to see it for yourself." Puzzled but curious, Lily gathered the still drowsy Emma from her crib and followed Jacob outside. He led them along a narrow trail that wound behind their cottages into the forest. After about 10 minutes of walking, he slowed, putting a finger to his lips. "Just around this bend," he whispered. "Stay quiet and move slowly." They rounded the corner, and Lily gasped. In a small clearing ahead, the mother bear sat with her surviving cub, but it was what lay at the edge of the clearing that caused Lily's heart to race. A freshly killed deer, placed deliberately at the boundary between forest and trail, clearly visible to anyone walking the path. "She brought it this morning," Jacob whispered. "I saw her from my kitchen window. She dragged it all the way here, left it, and then backed away to that spot. She's been sitting there for hours." Emma, who had been sleepily resting her head on Lily's shoulder, suddenly perked up. She made a soft sound and pointed toward the bears. The mother bear immediately raised her head, her keen senses detecting their presence. Instead of showing aggression, she remained seated, watching them with what could only be described as awareness. "It's an offering," came a voice behind them. Lily turned to find Sarah Blackhawk approaching quietly along the trail. The elder's face was solemn but unsurprised, as if she had expected this development. A gift of gratitude. "Bears don't bring gifts," Jacob protested softly. "That's not how they behave." "And yet," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the clear evidence before them, "here we are." Emma began to squirm in Lily's arms, clearly wanting to be put down. Every instinct in Lily's body screamed against it, yet the same inexplicable certainty that had held her back 3 days ago returned. The knowledge that her daughter was in no danger from this particular bear. "Lily, don't," Jacob began, but Sarah placed a restraining hand on his arm. Watch, the elder said simply. With trembling hands, Lily lowered Emma to the ground. The child immediately began toddling toward the clearing, her steps more confident than they had been just days before, as if her extraordinary experience had accelerated her development. The mother bear shifted slightly, her massive body tensing not in preparation to attack, but in what appeared to be recognition. The surviving cub peeked curiously from behind its mother's bulk. Emma stopped at the edge of the clearing, just feet from the deer carcass. She looked back at her mother, as if seeking permission to proceed. Lily found herself nodding, unable to explain even to herself why she was allowing this impossible interaction to continue. The little girl turned back to the bears and did something that caused Jacob to mutter an exclamation of disbelief. She bowed her head slightly, then raised it to meet the mother bear's gaze directly. It was a gesture no one had taught her, a movement that seemed to carry meaning beyond her years. The mother bear rose to her full height, an intimidating 7 feet of wild power. She made a soft huffing sound, then slowly, deliberately lowered herself back down. The message was unmistakable, though utterly impossible to explain through conventional understanding of animal behavior. Acknowledgment, perhaps even respect. For several breathless minutes, human child and wild bears regarded each other across the clearing. No words were exchanged, no physical contact made, yet communication was clearly happening on some level beyond ordinary perception. Then, as if some invisible signal had passed between them, the mother bear rose again and nudged her remaining cub. With one last look at Emma, she turned and led her offspring deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Emma watched them go, then turned and toddled back to Lily with a serene expression that belied the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred. "Did that really just happen?" Jacob asked, his voice unsteady. "Did a wild bear just make an offering to thank a human baby?" Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The old stories say that gratitude is understood by all creatures. It's one of the universal languages. She looked at Emma with respect. Your daughter spoke to this bear in a way that transcended ordinary boundaries. The bear is acknowledging that gift. Lily lifted Emma into her arms, feeling both shaken and profoundly moved. "What happens now?" she asked, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was asking or what exactly she meant by the question. "Now life continues," Sarah replied simply. "The bear will raise her surviving cub. Emma will grow, but neither will forget the connection they shared." She touched the pendant that Lily had placed around Emma's neck before they left the cottage. Some experiences change us in ways that can never be undone. They become part of our story, woven into who we are. In the days and weeks that followed, rangers occasionally reported sightings of the mother bear and her cub in the general vicinity, but they never again approached as close to the human dwellings as they had on that remarkable day. The deer carcass was removed by wildlife officials, documented as an unusual occurrence but ultimately filed away as an unexplained anomaly. Life did indeed continue. Spring melted into summer. Emma celebrated her first birthday with a small party attended by neighbors, including Jacob and Sarah. She grew more verbal, more coordinated, developing as all children do, yet there remained something in her eyes, a depth of awareness that visitors often remarked upon. "She has an old soul," people would say, not knowing how close they might be to the truth. Lily hung the pendant in Emma's room, within sight but out of reach of curious little hands. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning when the boundary between dreaming and waking was thin, she would hear her daughter making that same humming sound, the sound that had comforted a dying bear cub and somehow bridged an ancient divide between human and wild. And occasionally, on nights when the moon hung full and bright over the forest, Lily would catch a flicker of movement at the tree line, a large, dark shadow, pausing briefly before continuing on its solitary path through the wilderness. She never mentioned these sightings to the wildlife authorities, or even to Jacob. Some connections, she had come to believe, were meant to remain private, honored through silence rather than explanation. On Emma's second birthday, they awoke to find a perfect bear paw print pressed into the soft earth outside their cottage door. Much too large to belong to any local black bear, unmistakably from a full-grown grizzly. Lily photographed it before the rain washed it away, keeping the image as a tangible reminder of the extraordinary bond her daughter had formed. Scientists might call it coincidence or project human meaning onto animal behavior never intended to carry such significance. Others might see divine intervention or evidence of mystical connections between all living things. Lily had come to accept that perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between, in that liminal space where logic meets wonder, where the inexplicable reminds us that the world contains mysteries beyond our full comprehension. What remained undeniable was the profound impact of what they had witnessed, a moment when the artificial boundaries between species had dissolved, revealing a deeper truth about compassion that transcended language, logic, and conventional understanding. A mother bear had allowed a human child to comfort her dying cub when she could not. A baby too young to understand danger had somehow known exactly what was needed in a moment of suffering. And in that extraordinary convergence, something beautiful and impossible had happened, something that changed everyone who witnessed it, expanding their understanding of what connection truly means. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, Lily would tell her the story of that remarkable day, how a tiny girl with a heart full of compassion had brought even hardened wildlife officers to tears, how she had helped a mother bear say goodbye to her dying cub, how she had demonstrated the kind of empathy that adults often lose in their journey to rationality and self-protection. Whether Emma would remember any of it herself remained to be seen. But the story would become part of her personal mythology, helping shape her understanding of her place in the world and her connection to all living things. And perhaps somewhere in the depths of the forest, a mother bear carried her own version of the story, a memory of small, gentle hands offering comfort when nature's harsh laws demanded distance, of ancient boundaries briefly dissolved by the purest form of compassion. Some stories belong not just to those who live them, but to the collective wisdom of all who hear them. They remind us of possibilities beyond our everyday understanding, of connections that exist beneath the surface of our ordinary perceptions. They invite us to look at the world and each other with new eyes, to recognize the capacity for extraordinary compassion that exists even in the youngest and most vulnerable among us. The story of Emma and the bears became such a tale in the small mountain community, whispered around campfires, shared over coffee at the local diner, passed down from parents to children as both entertainment and lesson. With each telling, some details might shift or grow, as is the nature of stories that touch something essential about what it means to be alive in this world of wonders. But at its heart, the truth remained unchanged. A dying bear cub, a grieving mother, and a human baby who bridged the divide between them, offering comfort that could not be explained by science or logic alone, reminding all who witnessed it that compassion may be the most profound form of communication we possess, a universal language that, in rare and precious moments, allows us to transcend the boundaries that seem to separate us from one another and from the natural world to which we all belong. 10 years passed. Emma Morgan grew from the toddler who had comforted a dying bear cub into a thoughtful, quiet girl whose connection to animals remained extraordinary. Though she remembered nothing consciously of that day when she was 11 months old, the story had become foundational to her sense of self, not as a source of pride or specialness, but as a responsibility she carried within her. The lapis lazuli pendant Sarah had given her hung always around her neck, its deep blue stone a constant reminder of the bridge she had once created between worlds. Emma rarely spoke of her gift, but local ranchers often called upon her when they had a distressed animal that wouldn't respond to veterinary intervention. Somehow, her presence alone seemed to calm frightened horses and agitated livestock. She would sit quietly with them, sometimes humming that same tuneless melody she had used as a baby, and the animals would grow peaceful under her touch. "It's just because she's not afraid," skeptics would say. "Animals sense fear, and she doesn't have any." But those who witnessed her work more closely recognized that something deeper was happening, a form of communication beyond ordinary understanding. On the morning of Emma's 11th birthday, Lily found her daughter standing at the edge of the forest before dawn, the pendant clutched in her small hand, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. "Emma, what are you doing out here so early, sweetheart?" The girl turned, her expression serious beyond her years. "She's dying, Mom." A chill ran through Lily. "Who's dying, Emma?" "The bear. My bear. She's very old now, and she's coming to say goodbye." Lily felt her heart race. Over the years, there had been occasional sightings of a large female grizzly in the area, always at a distance, never threatening, as if maintaining a respectful boundary while remaining somehow connected to their lives. Park rangers estimated her age at nearly 25 years, exceptionally old for a wild bear, practically ancient. "Honey, how could you possibly know that?" Emma shook her head, unable to explain what she somehow understood with complete certainty. "She's coming today. I need to be here." Something in her daughter's calm assurance made Lily hesitate to dismiss the claim. She had learned over the years to trust Emma's unusual intuitions, especially when it came to animals. "I'll call Sarah," she said finally. "And Jacob. If there really is a bear coming close to the property, we need to take precautions." By mid-morning, a small group had gathered at the Morgan cottage. Jacob, now in his 70s but still sharp-eyed and capable, brought his binoculars. Sarah Blackhawk arrived with her granddaughter, Naya, who at 15 had become Emma's closest friend despite their age difference. Dr. Chen, the wildlife veterinarian who had examined the bear cub a decade earlier, came at Lily's request, bringing tranquilizer equipment as a precaution. "I still don't understand how Emma could know this," Dr. Chen said quietly to Lily as they watched the girl standing patiently at the forest's edge, Naya beside her for support. Sarah overheard and smiled gently. "There are connections that science cannot fully explain, Doctor. Emma and this bear share a bond that was forged in a moment of pure compassion. Such things leave marks on the soul that transcend ordinary understanding." Dr. Chen, who had once been purely skeptical of such notions, had seen enough in her years of wildlife work to maintain an open mind. "I suppose there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in my philosophy," she conceded with a small smile. The morning stretched into afternoon. The gathered group took turns keeping watch, sharing memories of that extraordinary day 10 years earlier when a baby had somehow bridged the divide between human and wild. It was Jacob who spotted the movement first, a slow, laborious shuffling at the distant tree line. Through his binoculars he could make out the massive form of an aged grizzly bear, her once powerful body now thin and bent with years, her movements stiff and pained. "She's here," he said softly, lowering the binoculars. "And she's alone." Emma stepped forward immediately, but Lily caught her arm. "Wait, sweetheart. Let Dr. Chen assess the situation first." The veterinarian raised her own binoculars, studying the approaching bear with professional detachment that couldn't quite mask her amazement. It's definitely a very old female grizzly. Her condition is poor, consistent with end-of-life deterioration, but her movement pattern is unusual. She's making a deliberate approach, not random wandering. Almost as if she didn't finish the thought, reluctant to attribute human-like intention to the behavior of a wild animal, despite what she was witnessing. Emma gently removed her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom. She didn't come for anyone else. She came for me." Before anyone could stop her, she walked forward with the calm confidence of someone much older than her 11 years. Naya made a move to follow, but Sarah held her granddaughter back. "This moment belongs to Emma alone," the elder said softly. They watched in tense silence as the girl made her way across the clearing toward the massive predator. Even in her weakened state, the old grizzly could easily kill a child with a single swipe of her powerful paw. Dr. Chen kept her tranquilizer gun ready, though she knew she might not be fast enough if the bear charged, but the animal showed no aggression. As Emma approached, the bear stopped and lowered her massive head, almost as if in greeting. The girl paused several feet away, respecting the wild creature's space while maintaining the connection between them. What happened next would be debated for years by those who witnessed it. Some would claim it was a series of coincidences, movements misinterpreted through the lens of human emotion. Others would insist they had seen something that defied all scientific understanding of animal behavior. The bear slowly, painfully lowered herself to the ground, her old bones seemingly grateful for the rest. Emma knelt in the grass a short distance away. For several long minutes, girl and bear regarded each other in silence. Then Emma began to hum, that same tuneless melody she had used a decade earlier to comfort a dying cub. The old bear's eyes, rheumy with age but still alert, remained fixed on the child. She made a soft chuffing sound in response, a bear's expression that those familiar with the species recognized as non-threatening, almost conversational. "She's communicating with it," Dr. Chen whispered, her scientific skepticism battling with the evidence before her eyes. "That's not normal bear behavior. Perhaps what we consider normal is simply the limit of our understanding," Sarah replied quietly. As they watched, Emma slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew the lapis lazuli pendant. The deep blue stone caught the afternoon sunlight, sending flashes of azure across the clearing. She held it out toward the bear, not offering it exactly, but showing it as one might share a significant object with an old friend. The bear made another soft sound, her gaze fixed on the glinting stone. Then, with visible effort, she raised her massive head toward the sky, taking in a long breath of air as if savoring the scents of the forest one final time. When she lowered her head again, something in her posture had changed. The tension of physical pain seemed to ease from her massive frame. She settled more deeply into the grass, her breathing slowing visibly. Emma began to speak then, her voice too low to carry to the watching group. Whatever words she shared with the ancient predator remained private, a conversation between two souls connected by an extraordinary past. Minutes stretched into an hour. No one in the watching group considered interrupting. Even Dr. Chen, with her scientific imperative to intervene if the bear was suffering, recognized that something profound and natural was unfolding, a passage that required no human management. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, the old bear's breathing slowed further. Emma moved slightly closer, still humming intermittently, still speaking those quiet words meant only for the bear's ears. The end, when it came, was so peaceful that those watching almost missed it. One moment the bear was breathing, her eyes fixed on Emma's face. The next, she was still, her spirit departed with dignity in the presence of the one being who had formed an inexplicable bond with her family a decade earlier. Emma remained kneeling beside the massive body for several long minutes. Then she gently placed the pendant on the bear's shoulder, not as an offering, but as a blessing, a marking of the sacred nature of the passage they had shared. When she finally rose and turned back toward the waiting group, her face was streaked with tears, yet she carried a profound serenity that affected everyone who saw her. She walked with deliberate steps, her young shoulders somehow stronger for having borne witness to this natural ending. "She's gone," Emma said simply as she reached them. "She wanted to say thank you and goodbye." Dr. Chen moved forward automatically, her professional training asserting itself. "I should check—" "She's at peace," Emma interrupted gently. She was very old and very tired. She chose her time and place. She looked up at the veterinarian with those old soul eyes that had always seemed to see beyond surface appearances. Isn't that what all creatures wish for in the end? The freedom to complete their journey with dignity. The doctor nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in the child's words. Sarah stepped forward and placed a weathered hand on Emma's shoulder. "You have honored her passing as she once honored her cubs. The circle is complete." News of the old bear's death and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding it spread quickly through official channels. Wildlife authorities arrived by evening to remove the body, treating it with unusual reverence after hearing the accounts of those who had witnessed the bear's final hours. Genetic testing would later confirm what many had already suspected. This was indeed the same mother bear who had allowed a human baby to comfort her dying cub a decade earlier. Her surviving cub, now a mature adult female with cubs of her own, had been tracked occasionally by wildlife officials throughout the years, maintaining the typical avoidance behaviors that kept healthy bears separate from human habitation. Only the old mother had maintained that unusual connection to the Morgan property. In the days that followed, Emma seemed both lighter and somehow more grounded. The pendant that had hung around her neck for most of her life now rested in a small wooden box on her bedside table, its purpose fulfilled, its story complete. "Do you think you'll miss her?" Lily asked one evening as she sat on the edge of Emma's bed, smoothing her daughter's hair as she had done every night since infancy. Emma considered the question thoughtfully. "I think a part of me always knew her, even though I don't remember that day when I was a baby. It feels like saying goodbye to someone I've known forever." She looked up at her mother. "But it also feels right her journey was complete." Lily marveled at her daughter's natural wisdom, a depth of understanding that seemed to transcend her years. "And what about your journey, my sweet girl? Your gift with animals. What do you think it means for your path ahead?" Emma smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her serious face into that of the child she still was, despite her old soul. "I think it means I need to listen carefully. All creatures have something to teach us if we're willing to hear them." That night, as Lily checked on her sleeping daughter, she noticed something she hadn't seen in years. Emma was humming in her sleep, that same tuneless melody that had once comforted a dying bear cub. But the sound was different somehow, lighter, almost joyful. In her dreams, perhaps, Emma walked with bears through sunlit forests, communication flowing freely between species in ways the waking world could barely comprehend. A week after the bear's death, Dr. Chen arrived at the Morgan cottage with an unexpected gift: a beautiful color photograph of a mother bear with 2 healthy cubs, taken by a wildlife camera just the previous spring. "DNA testing confirmed it," she explained as Emma studied the image with fascination. These are the grand cubs of the bear you helped as a baby, the offspring of the surviving cub that watched you comfort its sibling. I thought you might like to have this, a reminder that life continues, that your moment of compassion has rippled forward through generations. Emma traced the outline of the cubs with a gentle finger. Will they be protected? The entire area has been designated as a wildlife sanctuary, Dr. Chen assured her. These bears will live their lives undisturbed, as wild creatures should. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Emma returned to the spot where the old bear had completed her journey. The grass still held a slight depression where the massive body had rested. Emma sat beside it, the photograph of the grand cubs in her hands, completing a circle of connection that spanned generations, both bear and human. From the cottage window, Lily watched her daughter communing with a presence that was no longer visible, but perhaps still somehow present in the gathering twilight. She thought about the extraordinary thread that had woven through their lives since that day 10 years ago. How a moment of pure compassion from a baby, too young to understand fear, had created ripples that continued to move outward in ways they might never fully comprehend. Sarah had once told her that some children come into the world with ancient wisdom, with gifts that allow them to remind adults of connections they have forgotten in their journey toward rational thought and self-protection. Looking at Emma now, her face serene in the fading light, Lily could believe it. The story of the baby and the bears would continue to be told in their community and beyond, shared around campfires, published in local newspapers, eventually documented in a children's book that Emma herself would illustrate as a young adult. With each telling, some details might shift, some elements might be questioned by skeptics or embellished by those who loved mystery. But those who had witnessed any part of it carried the truth in their hearts, the knowledge that compassion could indeed bridge seemingly insurmountable divides. That understanding could flow between species when approached with an open heart. That sometimes the wisest among us are those whose souls have not yet forgotten how to recognize the shared spirit that animates all living creatures. As darkness settled over the forest, Emma finally rose and made her way back to the cottage, the photograph clutched carefully in her hands, her steps sure and confident on the familiar path. Behind her, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Somewhere in the distant mountains, a bear and her cubs settled into their den for the night, wild and free, connected by an invisible thread of compassion to the human child who had helped write their story. And in that moment, as it had been a decade earlier when a baby reached out to comfort a dying cub, the boundaries between human and wild seemed to dissolve, revealing the deeper truth that we are all, in the end, part of a single, precious web of life, each thread strengthening the others, each act of compassion rippling outward to touch lives we may never see, creating connections that endure long after we ourselves have returned to the earth from which we came. When Emma reached the cottage door, she paused and looked back one final time at the darkening forest. For just a moment, in the gathering shadows, she thought she glimpsed a large silhouette at the tree line, the merest suggestion of a mother bear standing tall, watching over her cubs with fierce, protective love. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Emma smiled and went inside, carrying with her the certainty that some connections transcend physical presence, that some bonds, once formed, can never truly be broken. And in that knowledge there was both peace and profound joy, the recognition that in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, compassion remains our most powerful tool for remembering our shared place in the great circle of life that unites us all. The End Epilogue. 20 years later. The morning light filtered through the canopy of pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Dr. Emma Morgan, now 31 years old, walked the familiar path with practiced ease, her footsteps nearly silent on the soft earth. Behind her followed a small group of graduate students, their faces a mixture of excitement and skepticism, as they participated in what Emma had dubbed immersive wildlife psychology. "Remember," Emma said softly, pausing to address the 5 young researchers, "we're guests in their home. Our presence should be as unobtrusive as possible. Observe, but don't interfere unless absolutely necessary." She touched the small blue stone that hung around her neck. The original lapis lazuli pendant had been set into a new silver setting, a graduation gift from her mother when Emma had completed her doctorate in wildlife behavior and interspecies communication, a field that barely existed when she had begun her studies. The pendant was her talisman, a physical connection to the extraordinary events that had shaped her life's path, even though she retained no conscious memory of that first encounter as a baby. The story had been told to her so many times, by her mother, by Jacob before his passing, by Sarah Blackhawk, who, at nearly 90, still served as a spiritual advisor to Emma's research team, that it had become a foundational myth in her personal narrative. "Dr. Morgan," whispered Kai Chen, grandson of the veterinarian who had examined the bear cub all those years ago. "The camera traps picked up significant activity in the north clearing last night. 3 females with cubs." Emma nodded, consulting the tablet that displayed a digital map of the sanctuary. What had begun as a small protected area around the location where the mother bear had died had grown into the Morgan Blackhawk Wildlife Preserve, over 50,000 acres of protected habitat where several generations of bears now lived in relative security. "We'll head there first," she decided. "The satellite tracking shows F-17 is in that vicinity." F-17, known informally to the research team as Matriarch, was the oldest known descendant of the original mother bear's surviving cub, now the leader of a thriving bear clan that had developed some highly unusual behaviors that were the focus of Emma's research. The group moved quietly through the forest, each student carrying sophisticated but unobtrusive monitoring equipment. Unlike traditional wildlife research teams, Emma's group used no tranquilizers, no radio collars, nothing that required physical intervention with the animals. Their approach was one of patient observation, technological innovation, and what more conventional scientists sometimes dismissively called intuitive interpretation. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Emma's research had revolutionized understanding of bear cognition and social structures, demonstrating levels of intelligence, emotional complexity, and cultural transmission that had previously been denied or overlooked by the scientific establishment. "We're approaching the clearing," Emma whispered, raising her hand to halt the group. "From here, we observe in silence." They settled behind a natural blind of fallen logs and dense undergrowth, perfect for watching without being immediately detected. Through specialized thermal binoculars, they could make out the forms of several bears in the distant clearing, 3 adult females, and at least 5 cubs of varying ages. "Matriarch is the one on the left," Emma murmured to Naya Blackhawk, Sarah's great-granddaughter who had followed in Emma's footsteps and now served as her primary research assistant. "Watch how the others orient themselves in relation to her." The scene playing out before them was remarkable to anyone familiar with typical bear behavior. Rather than maintaining the loose, primarily solitary social structure that characterized most bear populations, these females demonstrated clear cooperative behaviors, sharing in cub supervision, coordinating foraging activities, even appearing to communicate through a complex system of vocalizations and body postures that Emma's team had begun to catalog and interpret. "It's like watching wolf pack dynamics, but in bears," whispered one of the students, awe evident in his voice. Emma nodded, her attention fixed on Matriarch. The elderly bear, now nearly 20 years old, moved with the deliberate dignity of age, yet retained a commanding presence that the younger bears clearly respected. What made their observations particularly significant was that these were wild bears, not conditioned by humans, not habituated to feedings or other interventions. "They've developed a genuine social culture," Emma said softly, "passed down through generations." The implications were profound. Traditional scientific understanding held that bears were primarily solitary animals whose interactions with others of their kind were limited to mating and mothers raising cubs. Yet, here was clear evidence of multi-generational social learning, of bears adapting their fundamental behavior patterns in ways that contradicted established knowledge. Some of Emma's colleagues attributed these unusual behaviors to unique environmental factors or genetic anomalies. But Emma herself held a different theory, one she kept mostly to herself, except among her closest associates. She believed that something had fundamentally changed in this specific bear lineage 3 decades ago, that a moment of interspecies connection had somehow altered the developmental trajectory of an entire family line of bears. It was not a theory she emphasized in her peer-reviewed publications. Those papers focused on the observable phenomena, the measurable data, the patterns that could be documented through conventional scientific methods. Yet her research team understood the deeper narrative that underpinned their work, the story of a baby who had comforted a dying bear cub, creating ripples that continued to spread through time. As they observed, Matriarch suddenly raised her head, nose testing the air currents. She turned in their direction, her keen senses detecting something that had escaped the others. "She's caught our scent," Naya whispered. Emma raised her hand, signaling for absolute stillness. The standard protocol when discovered by bears was a careful, non-threatening retreat, but Emma remained motionless, her eyes locked on the distant form of Matriarch. The old bear rose to her full height, an imposing 7 feet of wild power. For a long moment she gazed in their direction, seemingly looking directly at their hiding place, though it would have been impossible for her to see them clearly at that distance. Then, to the amazement of the students, Matriarch made a soft chuffing sound and deliberately lowered herself back down, not in submission, but in what appeared remarkably like acknowledgment. "Did you see that?" one of the students breathed, excitement overriding his commitment to silence. She recognized Dr. Morgan's scent. Naya explained quietly. "It's happened before." This was the aspect of their research that generated the most controversy in scientific circles. The apparent recognition, even relationship between Emma and certain bears within the preserve. Critics dismissed it as anthropomorphism, or selective interpretation of random behaviors, but those who had witnessed it firsthand found such explanations increasingly difficult to accept. They observed for another hour as the bears went about their morning activities, the cubs playing under the watchful eyes of all 3 females, taking turns in what could only be described as social learning exercises, the adults communicating through subtle movements and vocalizations that Emma's team carefully recorded for later analysis. As they finally prepared to depart, following a different route to minimize their impact on the animal's habitat, Emma felt the familiar tug of connection that had defined her life's work. It wasn't mystical or supernatural in the way skeptics often characterized her research. It was something more fundamental, a recognition of the complex intelligence of non-human beings, an awareness of the profound connections that existed between all living creatures when one took the time to observe with an open mind and heart. Back at the research station, a collection of sustainable buildings constructed at the edge of the preserve. The team gathered to review their observations and recordings. The main laboratory hummed with activity as students analyzed data, compared notes, and engaged in the rigorous documentation that formed the backbone of their scientific work. Emma sat at her desk, transcribing her field notes into the project's secure database when her satellite phone rang. Few people had this number, primarily family and key research partners, so calls were generally significant. "Dr. Morgan," she answered, tucking the phone against her shoulder as she continued typing. "Emma?" "It's Daniel from the International Wildlife Trust." The voice of her colleague and sometimes research partner sounded unusually tense. "We've got a situation developing that I think you should know about." Emma stopped typing, giving him her full attention. "What's happening?" "The Jenkins Mining Corporation has filed for exploratory permits in the Eastern Expansion Zone. They're claiming there are critical mineral deposits that qualify for the national security exemption to protected status." A cold weight settled in Emma's stomach. The Eastern Expansion Zone was a crucial buffer area that her team had been working to add to the official sanctuary boundaries for the past 3 years. It contained vital watersheds and migration corridors that connected the preserve to other wild spaces. "They can't do that," she said, though she knew all too well that corporate interests often found ways around environmental protections. "We've documented extensive wildlife use in that entire region. They're arguing that the minerals in question, rare earth elements needed for advanced technology manufacturing, constitute a national security priority that overrides environmental concerns. They've got heavyweight political support." Emma closed her eyes briefly, centered herself. "Send me everything you have. We'll need to mount a comprehensive response. And Daniel? Don't discuss this with anyone outside our immediate circle yet. I want to review the data before this becomes public." After ending the call, Emma sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. The sanctuary had faced threats before, from logging interests, from development proposals, from changing political winds that shifted priorities away from conservation. Each time they had defended the preserve through science, through public education, through the painstaking legal processes that protected wild spaces. But this threat felt different, larger, more ominous, backed by the immense resources of a multinational corporation and the potent argument of national security concerns. A soft knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Naya entered, her expression concerned. "Bad news?" she asked, her intuition as keen as always. Emma nodded, explaining the situation in concise terms. Naya's face darkened as she grasped the potential consequences. If they start blasting and drilling in the eastern zone, it would disrupt migration patterns, contaminate watersheds, and directly threaten several bear denning sites, Emma finished, including the cave system where Matriarch's daughter raised her last 2 litters. Naya sank into the chair across from Emma's desk. At 25, she combined the traditional ecological knowledge passed down through her family with the scientific training she had received under Emma's mentorship. The result was a uniquely holistic approach to conservation that honored both empirical data and generational wisdom. "My great-grandmother would say this is a test," she said after a moment. "A challenge to determine how deeply we believe in the work we're doing." Emma smiled faintly. Sarah Blackhawk, though physically frail now, remained a powerful presence in their lives, the keeper of the original story, the one who had recognized Emma's gift even before Emma herself had understood it. "What would your great-grandmother suggest we do?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. Sarah's perspective had often provided insights that conventional scientific thinking missed. Naya considered the question thoughtfully. She would say that we need to remind people of the story, not just the scientific data, but the narrative that gives it meaning. People protect what they care about, and they care about what moves them emotionally. The answer resonated with Emma. Throughout her career, she had maintained a careful balance between scientific rigor and emotional truth, publishing peer-reviewed research while also sharing the story of her extraordinary connection with the bears through other channels. Her children's book, The Baby Who Spoke to Bears, had become an international bestseller, translated into 27 languages and used in environmental education programs worldwide. "You might be right," Emma said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. The Jenkins Corporation is counting on being able to frame this as a simple economic equation: valuable minerals versus remote wilderness that few people ever see. We need to change that narrative. She reached for her tablet, pulling up the sanctuary's digital archive. Thousands of hours of footage documenting the bears' lives, their remarkable social behaviors, their evident intelligence and emotional complexity. Somewhere in that archive was the story they needed to tell, a narrative powerful enough to counter the cold calculations of profit and supposed national interest. "Let's gather the team," she decided. "We're going to need everyone's expertise for this." As Naya left to summon the research staff, Emma's hand unconsciously went to the lapis lazuli pendant at her throat. The stone had been with her through every significant moment of her life, a tangible connection to that first extraordinary encounter that had set her on this path. She thought of her mother, Lily, now in her 60s and living in a small cottage at the edge of the sanctuary, of Jacob, who had passed away 5 years earlier but whose weathered face and kind eyes she could still picture clearly, of Dr. Chen, whose initial skepticism had gradually transformed into respect and eventually collaboration, of Sarah Blackhawk, whose wisdom continued to guide their work. Each of them had witnessed a moment of pure connection between species, a baby reaching out to comfort a dying bear cub, a mother bear returning decades later to complete the circle. They had seen firsthand how compassion could transcend the boundaries that seemingly separated humans from the natural world. Now, Emma faced the challenge of sharing that perspective with people who had never witnessed such moments, who viewed the natural world primarily through the lens of resources to be extracted or obstacles to be overcome. Outside her window, the sanctuary stretched to the horizon. Thousands of acres of protected wilderness where bears and other wildlife lived largely undisturbed by human activity. It represented more than just conservation success. It embodied a different way of relating to the natural world, not as masters or managers, but as respectful participants in a complex web of life. The gathering clouds on the eastern horizon seemed symbolic of the threat they now faced. Emma took a deep breath, centering herself in the knowledge that had guided her work from the beginning, that compassion was not merely a human virtue, but a universal language, that connection across species was not only possible, but essential to healing the growing divide between humanity and the natural world. The team began to assemble in the main conference room, faces serious as news of the threat spread. Emma gathered her materials and rose to join them, determination replacing her initial dismay. This would not be an easy battle, but it was one they could not afford to lose. Not just for the bears they had studied for so many years, but for the deeper principle that their research represented. As she walked toward the meeting, Emma glanced at the large photograph that hung in the corridor, an image captured by one of their remote cameras several years earlier. It showed Matriarch standing protectively over her cubs, her massive form silhouetted against the rising sun, a powerful symbol of wild dignity and maternal care. Beneath the photo was a simple inscription, words that had guided Emma's work from the beginning. "What touches the heart awakens the mind." It was this principle that would guide their response now, not just presenting scientific data, but telling a story powerful enough to remind people of their fundamental connection to the natural world. The coming weeks would test their resolve, their creativity, their commitment to a vision of conservation rooted in relationship rather than domination. But as Emma joined her team, she carried with her the certainty that had sustained her throughout her unconventional career, that the bonds formed between species in moments of compassion could indeed change the course of events, creating ripples that extended far beyond what conventional wisdom might predict. Outside, a distant storm grumbled over the mountains. Within the sanctuary, bears continued their daily routines, unaware of the human deliberations that would affect their future. And in the space between, in the careful documentation of their lives, in the stories told about their intelligence and complexity, in the growing understanding of their remarkable adaptations, lay the foundation for a new kind of relationship between humans and the natural world. It was this vision that Emma and her team would fight to protect, armed with both scientific data and the compelling narrative of connection that had begun 30 years earlier with a baby who reached out to comfort a dying bear cub, setting in motion a story that continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. As the team settled around the conference table, Emma placed her tablet in the center, displays illuminating with images of the bears they had dedicated their lives to understanding and protecting. "Before we begin strategizing," she said quietly, "I want to remind us all why we're here. This isn't just about protecting habitat or a single species, it's about preserving the possibility of connection, the recognition that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that transcends the artificial boundaries we've created between human and wild." She touched the pendant at her throat, drawing strength from its familiar presence. "Now, let's get to work. We have a story to tell." The meeting continued late into the evening, a determined group of scientists and conservationists crafting a response to the threat that loomed on their horizon. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, bears moved through their ancient forest home, carrying forward a legacy of unusual intelligence and social complexity that had begun with a single act of cross-species compassion. A legacy that now depended on humans remembering that such connections were not only possible, but essential to the continued flourishing of all life. In the days that followed, as their campaign to protect the sanctuary took shape, Emma often found herself returning to the clearing where the mother bear had completed her journey 20 years earlier. It was a place of pilgrimage for her, a reminder of the moment that had set everything in motion. Standing there one evening as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, she felt a familiar presence, not physical, but a sense of connection that transcended ordinary perception. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps imagination, or perhaps something more fundamental, a recognition that the boundaries between past and present, human and wild, living and gone, were more permeable than most people believed. "We'll protect them," she whispered to the gathering shadows, a promise to all that had come before and all that might yet be. "The story isn't over yet." And as if in answer, a distant sound echoed through the forest, the distinctive chuff of a bear, neither threatening nor afraid, but simply present, a wild voice speaking into the deepening twilight of a world where such voices grew increasingly rare and precious. Emma listened, her heart full, knowing that in that sound lay both the echo of the past and the hope for the future. A continuing conversation between species that had begun with a baby's compassion and now extended forward into possibilities yet to be written,